theyeshiva.net.
Let me take a few questions. Didn't David HaMelech destroy Hashem's name? Yes. You're referring to an amazing story in Maseches Sukkah, Daf Nun Gimel, I think it is, close to the end of Sukkah. David HaMelech began to lay the foundations for the Beis HaMikdash, and he dug what we call the shittin. When you pour the wine or the water on the altar, the liquids would go down. They would trickle down, flow downward. And the Gemara tells us that David reached the abyss, the Tahaim, and a flood surged upwards, and it threatened to destroy the world. And David HaMelech was looking for a heter to write Hashem's name, the Shem HaMefirish, the explicit name of Hashem, to write it and throw it into the water to be able to calm it down and not destroy the world. Achisoifel came forward and he made a kal v'chaymer. Madach, to make peace between a wife and a husband. If the husband suspects her of adultery, we're going to learn later, Hilchos Soita. The Torah says you write up the parsha of Soita on parchment with ink with Hashem's name, and you dissolve it in the water. You're actively destroying Hashem's name. But this is a mitzvah of Hashem. It's not forbidden. God says to do it. In other words, Hashem says, I want you to destroy my kedusha in order, lasses shalom, to make peace between a husband and a wife, which of course, in a more general sense, teaches us never allow God to become that which interferes in the love and the relation between a husband and a wife, because if you're introducing Hashem, Hashem is the one who wants peace, respect, humility, sensitivity, where a husband can truly respect the wife and the wife can truly respect the husband, and they can be there for each other. So Achisoifel said, certainly to save the world, we could do it. And that's when David HaMelech did that. But he needed a kal v'chaymer. Now here there's a big question on this story. Pikuach nefesh doiche kol haTorah kula. Are you allowed to erase Hashem's name to save your life? Of course. It's not one of the 3 sins of adultery, idolatry, or murder. You're not serving adultery when you erase Hashem's name. Pikuach nefesh. The flood was flooding the world. And one of the explanations in this is very powerful. What would help save the world in such a state is if you're doing something that the Torah says you should do. The power here was that the Torah says that you should do it. In other words, it's not stam, you throw in Hashem's name and it saves the world. So who cares if it's forbidden or not? It's pikuach nefesh doicha kol haTorah kula. The power here that would save the world is that the Torah says you should do it. For this, David HaMelech needed a source in Torah. So that's the story of David. Another question is, Moshe Rabbeinu destroyed the first luchos, and the first luchos had Hashem's name, Anochi Hashem Elekecha. That's an interesting question. No, what's the answer? You just got your answer, no? Pikuach nefesh doiche kol haTorah kula. Moshe broke the luchos, Rashi tells us, to save Klal Yisrael, to save the Jewish people. One of the explanations, Rashi brings in Parshas Kisisa. It was like a husband and a wife. They had a marital contract, and the wife betrayed the husband. So the best friend of the wife and the husband came and destroyed the marriage contract, so there was no proof, and that's how the queen was saved. That's perhaps one of the explanations. Ooh, I know about Tshuva who has a tattoo with Hashem's name. Can he go through the process of a tattoo removal procedure, which is erasing Hashem's name, or leave it? Excellent, excellent question. This is a question that's discussed by contemporary halachic authorities, and I would suggest this person consults with a rabbinical posek, an expert in this area. Generally, I believe that the consensus is that if it's done through a laser procedure, which is not a direct act of erasing, but it's more like when somebody goes to the mikveh, like we described before, and the water reaches it. It's an indirect act of erasing, and the person is doing it for the sake of a mitzvah, because I think the Noda B'Yehuda writes that even if you're not doing it directly, it's still disrespectful unless it's for the purpose of a mitzvah, like by a mikveh, and he's doing it for a mitzvah because with a tattoo of Hashem's name, he's basically never allowed to stand in a place where there's filth and excrement, because it's disrespectful, right? And every time he goes to the mikveh, he has to cover it, and so forth. So he's doing it for the sake of a mitzvah, so then there are halachic methods in which it is allowed to remove the tattoo. But it's a fascinating question because we learned about Hashem's name on the flesh. There's, of course, a story in Gemara Sanhedrin about one of the most vicious Jewish kings. His name was Eliakim, one of the last Judean kings. If you want to understand who he was, if you know Roman history, he was the Jewish Caligula. Caligula was not just a madman and a maniac, but he appointed his horse to the Roman Senate, his horse. This was Caligula. I guess I'll say Alahavdil Eliakim was not just vicious and heinous, but his crimes were beyond. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, one of the things he did was, it's hard to say, Chakak Shem HaMefurish Ba'amosai. He engraved Hashem's name in the place of his bris. That's how much anger he was displaying to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Talk about a Jew and his relationship with God. As Eli Wiesel said, we know how to love God, we know how to hate God, we don't know how to ignore God. Great questions, great questions. Beautiful questions. What about erasing Hashem's name on the computer? Excellent question, right? You write Hashem's name. Okay. So we have, let's say, the custom on letters, right? We want to mention Hashem's name, but you don't want to write Hashem's name in a letter. Why? Because even though you're not going to destroy it, you don't know what's going to happen to it. And another person can destroy it. It could be lifnei iver. And even if it doesn't get destroyed, it gets disposed, it goes to the garbage. It's still disrespectful. You know, the kinuyim, the expressions of Hashem's name, the Rambam says you're allowed to erase them. But still, it says you have to treat it with respect. That's why at the end of the parak, he speaks about the idea that there are kinuyim, you still have to treat it with respect. So therefore, we write on top of a letter, Beis Hey, Baruch Hashem, or B'Sayata Deshmaya. So we're alluding to Hashem without Hashem's name. That's why, by the way, we use the word Hashem. Hashem means the name. It's not one of Hashem's names. It's talking about the name. It alludes to Hashem, but it doesn't have that sanctity. You're asking, what about on a computer? So on a computer, this is a very important. It's a very important question. And here again, you can discuss it with a halachic authority, but generally, I believe there is a lot of literature, contemporary literature about this, and the consensus is that most halachic authorities deem a computer screen and its contents, even the names of Hashem or words of Torah, to have no sanctity. And the reason is because as opposed to a hand writing or the printed word, which are intended to be permanent, there's no intention for words typed on a computer screen to be permanent. So as soon as you finish your work, you close the screen and everything there is erased. It's written in a way that you don't want it to be permanent because the encrypted data on the hard drive has no halachic significance. So it's not a medium intended to support anything of permanence, as the pixels which make up the letters on the computer screen are constantly being refreshed and are considered to be more virtual than they are real. So therefore, I think most halachic authorities agree that one can erase the name of Hashem or words of Torah from a computer screen. As many also point out, it's not really called a ksav. It's not something that's called the written word. It's basically pixels of light and coding that appear to us as words, and therefore it doesn't have that sanctity. That is, I think, the opinion of most halachic authorities. Next question. Why does the Rambam add the word hakdoshim, hatahirim in the beginning of Perek Shishi? I think my comments at the end of the Perek really answer that question. Why? I still don't understand. Why is destroying the names part of Yesodei HaTorah? It's an Aveda. Why is it the foundation in Torah? Put it in Hilchos Torah when discussing when the names of Hashem should be written. In fact, in Shulchan Aruch and in Tur, where is it? Where is it? If you'll take a look, it's Yesodei Siman Reish Ayin Vav. Yesodei Siman Reish Ayin Vav Hilchos Torah. Gewaldige Shaila. The Rambam puts it in Yesodei HaTorah. That's why I suggested what I suggested, that for the Rambam, this is actually a continuation to Kiddush Hashem. There's the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, the mitzvah of Chilul Hashem. When you Mekadesh Hashem, you really brought the Kedusha of Hashem into this world. You will become an embodiment of Kiddush Hashem through your conduct, through your behavior, through your heroic choices. The next Perek Vav, is a continuation of that, expressed in a different mitzvah. And that is, when I write Hashem's name, the Kedusha of Hashem is in this world. And for the Rambam, that seems to be a fundamental aspect of halacha. The capacity of the human being and the capacity of the Jew to become a vessel for godliness in this world, to become a conduit through which the Kedushas Hashem, the manifested presence of Hashem, is experienced in our world in a very real and tangible way. Next question. Why does the Rambam say that the Shloim and Shir Hashirim is like one of these expressions, the kinuyim that we use to Hashem's name, or Ant Malka Melech Malchaya, when the Rambam says that you're allowed to erase them? So who cares? So the Kesef Mishneh discusses it, the Ritva, the Ran, the Rosh, it's all discussed. Why is it so relevant? It's also possible that maybe the Rambam means, at least, even if you're allowed to erase it, but perhaps it has to be treated with respect, which means to destroy it, to burn it intentionally to want to destroy it may be prohibited. That may be one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is brought in some of the Rishonim, that when are you allowed to erase the kinuyim? When they're written not in their place, but if they're written in their place, meaning in the Tanakh, then you're not allowed to erase it. The Avodas HaMelech discusses this. Thank you for the reference. There's another explanation I saw that in Halacha Hey, you could say Harem Keshar Kisvei HaKodesh, not Divrei HaKodesh. Why? Because even though the Rambam says you're not allowed to erase Kisvei HaKodesh, right? So some commentators explain that when it's for a benefit, you're allowed to erase, as opposed to the other 7 names which can never be erased. Erasing of Hashem's name is also in English, yeah. According to many, yeah. The Mishneh Yaakov, somebody points out, discusses why the Rambam doesn't mention Yud K as one of the 7 names, even though he mentions it later. So he brings from the Vilna Gaon, the Bir Hagra, in Yesodei and Shulchan Aruch, that the Rambam didn't say Yud K, Shu Nichlal Gamkin B'Shema Etzem, because Yud K is part of Yud K Vav K. So it's included in Yud K Vav K. Like we see by Amalek, I'm adding this, that Yud K is considered an incomplete name. In other words, it's part of Yud K Vav K. So why does the Rambam have to mention it? It's part of Yud K Vav K. The Rambam mentioned Kale. The Rambam mentioned Kale. And Kale is part of Elikim. So he does mention names that are part of other names. So the Vilna Gaon says fascinatingly that Kale is a different shirish. Kale means Elei Haaretz. Elei means the powerful ones of the world, of the land. Kale means strength, ferociousness. He brings the pasuk, Kelei Haaretz. So it's a different shirish. El, it's like its own shirish. Elikim is one name. Aleph Lamed happens to be part of Elikim, but it has its own meaning, its own theme. But Yud-Kei, says the Vilna Gaon, is the same theme like Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means Hashem is, He was, He is, He will be, He's the source of creation. The word Hoive, Lashon Hoive, Yiyeh, Hoya, Hoya, everything comes into being. Baruch Sha'amar v'Hoya ha'olam, existence. And that's also Yud-Kei. You don't have Yud-Kei in a different context, so that's why the Rambam doesn't mention Yud-Kei. Another explanation is the Sameach. Yud-Kei is part of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And Aleph Lamed is part of Alekim, but it has a different pronunciation. Kale and Eloikim. And therefore, he mentions both, because it's a different nikud, the way it's pronounced. Kale and Eloikim. But Yud-Kei and Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, you can't say that, because Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, we don't even have a way it's pronounced. That's the Sameach's explanation. Another proof to all of this is, by Amalek it says, the name is not complete and the throne is not complete. So it says, Ki Yod al Keis Yud-Kei. Keis is part of Kisei. Chav Samach is part of Kisei. It's not separate. A throne is Chav Samach Aleph. And Yud-Kei is part of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. It's part of it. It's not separate. So this is a beautiful explanation of why the Rambam doesn't mention Yud-Kei separately. Beautiful, beautiful explanation. So that's what the Rambam says. If you write Aleph Lamed from Elikim, or you write Yud-Kei from Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, you're not allowed to erase it. Certainly if you wrote Yud-Kei on its own, In other words, not just as part of Shem HaMefurish, but on its own, certainly you're not allowed to erase it, because it's a Shem b'fnei atzmai. It's a name which is separate, because this name is part of Shem HaMefurish. The Pri Chadash is Goyd is va'oid, b'fnei shezeh Shem is Shem HaMefurish. In other words, he's saying two things. When you write Yud Kei on its own, it's both an independent name, but in addition to that, it's also part of Shem HaMefurish. So certainly you're not allowed to erase it, because it's part of Shem HaMefurish, but it's also a separate name. And Shin Dalet is part of Shin Dalet Yud, but it looks like the Rambam is saying that because it's part of Shem HaMefurish, it has its own kedusha. Now some struggle with this. Yeah, the Radbaz is Goyres that if you write Keil from Elikim and Vav Kei from Shem Havaya, it's not erased, and certainly Yud Kei, because Yud Kei is a name in and of itself. And Vav Kei is part of Shem HaMefurish, so you're not allowed to erase it. Even though Shin Dalet you're allowed to erase. That's Tshuvas or Radbaz Chelik Kei. It's complicated because of the text. I also mentioned what Aruch HaShulchan says here. I'm just thinking maybe the Rambam is also referring to and alluding to this idea that we just discussed. The Rambam is saying, if you write an Aleph Lamed from Elikim, or you write a Yud Kei from Yud Kei Vav Kei, you're not allowed to erase it. And certainly if you write Yud Kei on its own, just you want to write Hashem's name, who Shem b'fnei atzmai. It's a name in and of itself. And then it says, Mipnei shezeh Hashem miktzah Shem HaMefurish, because this name is part of Shem HaMefurish. Now, what's the Mipnei shezeh? So the Pri Chadash says you have to put in the word va'oid. In addition to that, it's also part of Shem HaMefurish. The Radvaz said he's talking about Vav Kei, not Yud Kei. Not let even erase Vav Kei. Interesting explanations. Maybe, I don't know, and could be it's completely off. But maybe the Rambam says Yud Kei shu Shem b'fnei atzma. Yud Kei is a name in and of itself. So if I write Yud Kei, I'm not allowed to erase it because I just wrote Hashem's name. So now when I'm reading this, I should ask, wait. Yud Kei is a name? Why didn't you mention Halacha Beis? Should it be an eighth name? Yud Kei. You just said it's a name. You're contradicting yourself between Beis and Dalet? So the Rambam says, B'pnei shezeh Shem miktzah Shem HaMefurish. Because this name is part of the Shem HaMefurish. In other words, it's an extension of the Shem HaMefurish, but it has its own kedusha. You can have a miktzah Shem HaMefurish that's not a Shem b'fnei atzmai. It's part of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Here, it's miktzah Shem HaMefurish. That's why I didn't mention it before, because it's part of Shem HaMefurish. And yet, it has its own sanctity as part of the Shem HaMefurish as the first two letters. Yeah, next question. What did the Rambam mean in Halacha Hey that Divrei HaKodesh you're allowed to erase? What does it mean? Well, as I told you, I used the text that says Divrei HaKodesh. There's a difference between Kisvei HaKodesh and Divrei HaKodesh. Divrei HaKodesh means holy words. So let's say I write a pasuk in a letter to somebody. Am I allowed to erase that? I'm not talking about Hashem's name, not Hashem's name. Just words from Torah. So the Rambam says you're allowed to erase them. You're allowed to erase them. Kisvei HaKodesh are holy writings. The writing is holy. Like when they would write, you write a Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah is holy. And they used to write the whole Tanakh on Megillus, on scrolls. Those are called Kisvei HaKodesh, holy writings. Or today we have Sfarim, in which the Chumash is printed. And we're very careful, we're very respectful to them. And even Divrei HaKodesh you have to be respectful. But the Rambam says, Mutter l'machkam, you're allowed to erase them. That's the difference of Kisvei HaKodesh and Divrei HaKodesh. Now what about Kinuyim? The Kinuyim are the descriptive names of Hashem. Not Hashem's essential names, Keil Elokah, Yud, Kei Vav Kei Elikim, but like Chanun V'Rachum. So the Rambam says you're allowed to erase them, right? But if it's part of Kisvei HaKodesh, then you're not allowed to erase them. You're only allowed to erase them if they're written somewhere else. If somebody has the word Rachum, Chanun, Hagadol, Hagibur, Hanoir, even if he's referring to Hashem, I'm allowed to erase it. But if it's part of the Kisvei HaKodesh, then I'm not allowed to erase it. So that's why at the end of the Rambam, when he says that Shloimeh is Kodesh, or Antu Malka Melech Malchaya is Kodesh, it means it's part of the Kinuyim. So therefore, when it's part of Kisvei HaKodesh, I'm not allowed to erase it. It's one of the Kinuyim. So B'mkayim, I'm not allowed to erase it. This is what's explained by the Sefer Avodas HaMelech. This is how he understands the Rambam.
This class is brought to you by the Yeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.